What if the stories of how the world began hold the secret to humanity's deepest fears and desires? Think about it. Every culture, every civilization has its own version of how the universe came to be. But these aren't just whimsical tales told around ancient campfires. They're emotional blueprints, carefully crafted maps of the human psyche, revealing what we value, what we fear, and what we long for. From the cosmic battles of Greek mythology to the gentle emergence of life in Polynesian legends, creation myths are mirrors reflecting the soul of the societies that birthed them. And here's the fascinating part: these stories aren't locked in the past. They're alive, shaping how we see ourselves and the world even today. Consider the themes that echo across these myths: chaos giving way to order, darkness pierced by light, the struggle for power, the yearning for belonging. These aren't just plot points, they're universal human experiences etched into our collective memory. Why do so many cultures tell stories of gods shaping the world from nothingness? Or of great floods wiping the slate clean? It's because these narratives speak to something primal within us: the fear of the unknown, the hope for renewal, the eternal quest for meaning. And when we peel back the layers of these myths, we uncover something extraordinary, a shared emotional language that transcends time and geography. So today, we're embarking on a journey, one that will take us from the dawn of human imagination to the present day, where these ancient stories still whisper to us. We'll explore how creation myths reveal the hidden emotional architecture of civilizations, how they've shaped societies, and why they continue to resonate in our modern lives. This isn't just about understanding the past, it's about unlocking the secrets of who we are. Because when we listen closely to these ancient voices, we might just hear the echoes of our own deepest fears, desires, and dreams. Ready to dive in? Let's begin. From the swirling waters of the Babylonian Enuma Elish to the sacred songs of the Aboriginal Dreamtime, creation myths emerge in every corner of the world like echoes of the same profound human question: where did we come from? It's astonishing when you realize how these stories, separated by oceans and millennia, share striking similarities. Take the Norse Yggdrasil, the great tree that cradles the 9 realms in its branches. Isn't it remarkable how this image mirrors the world trees found in Mayan, Hindu, and even Siberian myths? Or consider the theme of chaos giving way to order, a thread that weaves through Greek, Egyptian, and Chinese cosmologies alike. These aren't coincidences, they're clues to something deeper, a universal language of the human experience. What does it mean that cultures with no possible contact, like the indigenous peoples of Australia and the ancient Mesopotamians, crafted stories with such parallel themes? Perhaps it reveals a shared psychological blueprint, a way for humanity to grapple with the terrifying vastness of existence. The Babylonian Enuma Elish tells of the god Marduk slaying the primordial chaos monster Tiamat, carving her body into the heavens and earth. Half a world away, the Maori of New Zealand speak of the Sky Father Rangi and Earth Mother Papa, torn apart by their children to create the world. Both stories transform fear of chaos, of the unknown, into something tangible, something conquerable. That's the power of these myths. They don't just explain the world, they make it feel safe, purposeful, ours. And then there's the Aboriginal Dreamtime, where ancestral spirits sing the land into being. Here, creation isn't a one-time event, but a living, breathing connection between past and present. It's a stark contrast to the Norse vision of a world born from the clash of fire and ice, yet both carry the same emotional weight, a longing to belong to something greater. Whether through divine battles, cosmic trees, or ancestral songs, these myths answer a need buried deep in our collective psyche, the need to matter. To know that our existence isn't random, that the universe has a story and we're part of it. So why do these ancient tales still tug at us today? Maybe because they're not really about the past. They're about us, our fears of disorder, our hunger for meaning, our unshakable belief that even in the darkest chaos, there's a pattern waiting to be found. When we listen to these stories, we're not just hearing how the world began. We're hearing how humanity learned to hope, chaos, and order. It's the oldest story ever told, whispered across cultures in the language of gods and monsters. Picture the Greek myth of chaos, that yawning void where everything began, a formless, swirling mass of potential and terror. Or the Hindu Rigveda's Nasadiya Sukta, where even the gods don't yet exist, and the universe is a question waiting to be answered. These aren't just poetic images, they're primal reflections of humanity's first emotional conflict, the paralyzing fear of the unknown, and the desperate need to carve meaning from the madness. Why does this duality appear everywhere, from the Babylonian Tiamat's watery chaos to the Norse Ginnungagap's icy abyss? Because chaos isn't just a cosmic condition, it's a psychological one. Studies in cognitive psychology reveal how our brains rebel against uncertainty, scrambling to find patterns even in randomness. It's why ancient cultures personified chaos as dragons, serpents, or churning waters, monsters to be slain, tides to be tamed. The victory of order over chaos isn't just a plot point, it's a survival mechanism. When the Egyptian god Ra defeats the serpent Apep each night, or when the Japanese storm god Susanoo subdues the eight-headed Orochi, they're acting out humanity's deepest wish, to believe the universe isn't just random cruelty, that our actions matter. And here's the haunting part, we still live this myth today. Modern anxieties about pandemics, climate change, or political upheaval, they're echoes of that same ancient dread. Psychologists call it the illusion of control, our tendency to overestimate how much we can influence chaotic events. We create rituals, routines, even conspiracy theories, all attempts to impose order on a world that refuses to obey. The irony is delicious. Millennia after the Rigveda's poets pondered the void, we're still writing the same story. But myths don't just expose our fears, they offer a blueprint for courage. Take the Zoroastrian duel between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, light versus darkness. Unlike other traditions where order simply wins, here the battle rages on, a striking admission that chaos can't be erased, only confronted. That's the emotional genius of these stories. They don't promise easy answers. They tell us the struggle itself is sacred. When the Cherokee grandmother spider weaves the world from chaos, or when the Chinese Pangu carves heaven and earth from his own body, they're teaching us something radical. Chaos isn't the enemy. It's the raw material of creation. So what happens when we stop fearing the void and start seeing it as possibility? Maybe that's the real gift of these myths, not just comfort but a challenge. To build our own order, knowing it's fragile, to face the unknown not with weapons but with stories. After all, isn't that how every civilization begins? With a breath, a word, a spark of light in the dark, every creation myth asks not just how the world was made, but why we're here at all. And the answer often lies in the gods themselves, figures who embody our deepest emotional needs. Take the Maori story of Ranginui and Papatuanuku, the Sky Father and Earth Mother locked in an eternal embrace. Their children, trapped between them in darkness, must tear them apart to create light and space for life. It's a heartbreaking moment full of love and loss, reflecting a universal truth. Even creation comes at a cost, but notice how these gods aren't distant architects, they're parents. Their bodies become the world, their emotions woven into the land. That's no accident. When a culture envisions its creators as caregivers, it's revealing something profound about what its people crave, belonging, protection, the certainty that the universe itself holds them close. Now compare that to the Christian Yahweh speaking worlds into existence with divine authority. Here, creation is an act of will, a sovereign's decree. The emotional tone shifts from intimacy to awe, from embrace to command. Yet both myths fulfill the same human longing, to know we're not alone, that someone greater watches over us. Whether it's a parent's love or a king's order, these stories answer our fear of abandonment, our need to believe life has a guardian, but not all gods offer comfort. The Inuit Sedna, goddess of the sea, is a figure of raw power and terrifying grace. Betrayed by her father, her fingers chopped off as she clings to his kayak, she becomes the ruler of marine life, both provider and punisher. Here, the divine isn't warm or predictable. Sedna mirrors the harsh Arctic environment, teaching her people that survival depends on respect, not just reverence. What does this tell us? Cultures shape their gods to reflect not just their desires, but their struggles. Where agricultural societies might worship earth mothers brimming with fertility, hunter-gatherers often revere deities as unpredictable as the hunt itself. These divine relationships don't just live in stories, they shape entire civilizations. When gods are parents, like Ranganui and Papatuanuku, societies often emphasize family, ancestry, and communal harmony. When gods are rulers, like Yahweh, laws and covenants take center stage. And when gods are forces of nature, like Sedna, traditions focus on balance, reciprocity, and survival. It's as if each culture builds its moral compass by asking, what do we need from the divine? Love, order, respect. The answer becomes the bedrock of their world. And perhaps that's the most revealing thread of all. Whether tender or terrible, these creator figures show us humanity's oldest dilemma: how to live in a world we didn't make, but must somehow call home. The Maori child of the earth and sky, the Christian made in God's image, the Inuit hunter at Sedna's mercy, each is searching for the same thing, a way to say, I am here, and it means something. But what happens when the gods themselves break the rules? Enter the trickster, the Loki who turns the world upside down, the Anansi who weaves chaos into wisdom, the coyote who stumbles into creation through sheer mischief. These figures don't just live in the margins of myth, they tear holes in the fabric of order, forcing the universe to bend and adapt. And here's the paradox: cultures that worship stability and harmony still carve out sacred space for these agents of chaos. Why? Because tricksters embody the most human of truths, that progress often begins with a little rebellion. Take Loki, the Norse shapeshifter who laughs in the face of destiny. He's the one who cuts off Thor's wife's hair as a prank, then fixes it by convincing dwarves to forge magical treasures, gifts that will later save the gods in battle. He's chaos with a purpose. Or Anansi, the Ashanti spider god who steals stories from the sky god not out of greed, but to share them with humanity. These aren't just troublemakers, they're the original disruptors, proving that sometimes the only way to move forward is to shake the foundations. Modern culture is obsessed with their descendants, the antiheroes, the rogues, the genius rebels who color outside the lines. From Tony Stark's irreverent brilliance to the Joker's chilling anarchy, we're drawn to characters who refuse to play by the rules. It's the same emotional pull that made ancient audiences cheer for Anansi's schemes or gasp at Loki's betrayals. Tricksters remind us that control is an illusion, that life is messy, and that brilliance often lives in the cracks of convention. Yet myths never let chaos win outright. For every Loki, there's a Thor to restore balance. Anansi's tricks often teach as much as they torment. This tension isn't accidental, it's the heartbeat of civilization. Societies that idolize order alone stagnate. Those that embrace chaos alone crumble. The trickster's real gift isn't destruction, but the space they create for reinvention. When the Polynesian Maui slows the sun with his ropes, he's not just causing havoc, he's reshaping the world to fit human needs. So why do we still need these chaotic spirits today? Maybe because they're the antidote to our deepest fear that the systems we rely on might be as fragile as they seem. The trickster whispers, yes, they are. And that's where the magic begins. The moment everything changes, that's where these myths grip us hardest. Think of Eve reaching for the fruit, Pandora lifting the lid, or the Maori siblings pushing their parents apart. These aren't just stories about mistakes, they're about the irreversible step that alters existence itself. What's fascinating isn't the act of disobedience, it's what comes after. The crushing weight of guilt in Eden, the trembling hands of Pandora as chaos spills into the world, the Maori gods weeping as they separate sky from earth. These emotions aren't ancient relics, they're the same ones we feel when we cross a line we can't uncross. That first betrayal, the secret spilled, the trust broken. Myths about the fall aren't about punishment. They're about the moment we realize we're capable of breaking things, including ourselves. Look closer and you'll notice something surprising. These stories rarely frame curiosity as purely destructive. Yes, Pandora's box unleashes suffering, but it also releases hope. Eve's bite brings knowledge, painful but transformative. Even the Maori siblings, drenched in guilt, create space for humanity to flourish. The message is subtle but radical. Growth often begins with a wound. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, the idea that loss can forge resilience. Myths knew it first. The Greek word for truth, aletheia, literally means not forgetting. These stories force us to remember our stumbles, not to shame us, but to show how far we've come. Societies have always ritualized this tension. The Jewish Day of Atonement, the Hindu story of King Harishchandra's trials, even the Aztec myth of Quetzalcoatl descending into the underworld to retrieve bones for a new humanity. They all replay the fall, not as tragedy, but as necessary reckoning. Notice how these myths rarely end with paradise regained. Instead, they leave humanity in the messy middle, tasked with building meaning from the fragments. That's the emotional core. Whether it's the Cherokee mourning the theft of fire or the Norse Loki's betrayal triggering Ragnarok, these tales acknowledge a hard truth. Loss isn't the exception. It's the condition. Yet here's the twist: cultures that memorialize the fall most vividly often celebrate resilience most fiercely. The Japanese kintsugi art of mending broken pottery with gold mirrors, their myth of Izanagi chasing Izanami into the underworld. Both whisper the same lesson: what's shattered can still hold beauty. The Christian concept of original sin birthed revolutions in art and ethics, turning guilt into a catalyst for creativity. Even Pandora's jar, often misremembered as a punishment, ends with hope clinging to the rim. That's the paradox these myths guard like a secret. To be human is to carry both the wound and the remedy, the fall and the stubborn will to rise. So why do we keep telling these stories? Because they're the oldest mirrors we have. When a child learns Santa isn't real, when a friendship fractures, when a society faces its own failures, we're reliving Eden, Pandora, the Maori siblings. Not to despair, but to discover what comes next. After all, every myth of paradise lost is also, quietly, a story about what grows in the soil of that loss. And isn't that the most human thing of all, to gaze at the broken pieces and still dare to build? Water rises in every corner of the human imagination, not just as disaster, but as a sacred reset. The flood that swallows the world in Noah's story isn't so different from the deluge Utnapishtim survives in the Epic of Gilgamesh, or the torrents that purge humanity in Hindu and Maya legends. But look closer. These aren't just tales of destruction, they're emotional blueprints for how civilizations process collective trauma. When the Babylonian gods send the flood because humanity's noise disturbs their sleep, or when the biblical God reacts to human corruption, the message is the same: water doesn't just destroy. It judges, and in that judgment lies a paradox. The very thing that erases also makes space for renewal. Consider the emotional arc of these stories. Utnapishtim doesn't just build a boat, he's given divine secrets, a whispered promise of survival. Noah receives not just a warning, but a covenant, a rainbow as collateral that the world won't drown again. Even the Aztec tale of the fourth son, where humanity is washed away and rebuilt from bones, carries this dual heartbeat of loss and hope. It's no accident that flood myths dominate agricultural societies. For people who depended on the Nile's floods or the Tigris's whims, these stories were psychological tools. They transformed helplessness into meaning, framing catastrophe as part of a larger cycle rather than random cruelty. Now fast forward to modern disaster narratives. When climate activists speak of rising seas or wildfires, they're tapping into that same mythic language, the fear of divine, or now, ecological retribution. Hollywood blockbusters like 2012 or The Day After Tomorrow are just Gilgamesh with special effects, scratching our ancient itch to imagine the worst and still find a way through. Psychologists call this tragic optimism, the ability to hold both despair and hope in the same hand. Myths knew it first. The flood isn't just punishment, it's the womb for whatever comes next. And that's where rebirth myths take the stage. The Egyptian phoenix bursting from ashes, the Hindu cosmic cycles of creation and dissolution, even the Norse Ragnarok, where two humans hide in Yggdrasil to repopulate the world, they all whisper the same reassurance: endings are never final. Modern science echoes this in the language of supernova birthing new stars or forests regenerating after fire. But myths go further. They don't just describe renewal, they make it sacred. When the Japanese sun goddess Amaterasu hides in a cave, plunging the world into darkness, her return isn't just daylight, it's ritualized every year in festivals, turning myth into collective memory. Here's the revelation buried in these stories: the flood, the fire, the endless night. They're not just about surviving, they're about who we become after. Noah plants a vineyard and gets drunk. Utnapishtim becomes immortal but isolated. Rebirth isn't a happy ending, it's a reckoning. Maybe that's why these myths still resonate in an age of climate grief and pandemics. They don't promise easy resets, they ask the harder question: what will we carry forward when the waters recede? The answer, then and now, isn't in the ark. It's in the hands of those who step onto the muddy earth and choose what to build next. Heroes don't just save worlds, they shape them from the raw clay of chaos. Take Marduk, the Babylonian storm god who rises to face the primordial dragon Tiamat. His victory isn't just about strength, it's a masterclass in emotional labor. He doesn't merely slay chaos, he dismembers Tiamat's body to craft the heavens and earth, turning terror into architecture. Or Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent who ventures into the underworld to gather bones and breathe life into a new humanity. These aren't action heroes, they're cosmic artisans, transforming destruction into creation through sheer will. What makes their journeys so timeless isn't the spectacle, but the subtext. Perseverance isn't just about enduring pain, it's about alchemizing it into something sacred. Joseph Campbell called this the monomyth, the hero's journey that echoes across cultures. But strip away the archetypes and you'll find something more intimate. These stories aren't just templates for adventure, they're emotional survival guides. When Marduk faces Tiamat, he's embodying humanity's oldest dilemma: how to confront the void without being consumed by it. The Aztecs understood this when they framed Quetzalcoatl's descent into Mictlan as a negotiation with death itself. Heroes in creation myths don't just fight monsters, they dance with the very forces that could unravel existence. And that's where the real resonance lies. Modern psychology recognizes this pattern. The hero's journey mirrors our own struggles with adversity, the call to adventure. That's the job offer in a new city, the diagnosis that rewrites your life. The abyss, the moment you realize there's no turning back. These myths give us a language for our own battles, whispering, transformation demands sacrifice, but it also births new worlds. Yet not all heroes wear the same face. Look at the gender roles woven into these tales, and you'll uncover another layer of emotional truth. Marduk and Quetzalcoatl are warriors, yes, but then there's Nuwa, the Chinese serpent goddess who repairs the crumbling sky with melted stones. Her heroism isn't conquest, it's meticulous care. The Hawaiian goddess Pele shapes islands not through battle, but through the volatile creativity of her volcanic fires. Even Tiamat, often reduced to a monster, is first described as the nurturing mother of all in Babylonian texts before conflict twists her into chaos. These variations aren't random, they reflect how cultures encode different kinds of strength. The nurturing creator, the strategic negotiator, the relentless warrior, each offers a unique blueprint for facing life's upheavals. The brilliance of these myths lies in their contradictions. Marduk's triumph requires the death of a mother figure. Quetzalcoatl's rebirth hinges on stealing from the land of the dead. Nuwa's repair work begins only after heaven's pillars collapse. They teach us that creation is never clean, never kind. It's a messy, aching process that demands everything, and that's why these stories still grip us. When we watch a hero wrestle order from chaos, we're seeing our own struggles mirrored on a cosmic scale. The student studying through the night, the artist facing the blank canvas, the parent rebuilding after loss. We're all answering the same call these gods once did. To create is to confront the unmaking and somehow, impossibly, to begin anyway. Earth mothers and sky fathers, these aren't just divine roles, they're mirrors reflecting how civilizations have wrestled with the duality of existence itself. Gaia, the Greek embodiment of the earth, emerges from chaos not with a thunderbolt but with quiet, boundless fertility. She doesn't conquer, she nurtures, her body becoming mountains, valleys, the very soil that cradles life. Now contrast that with Zeus, the sky father whose power crackles in lightning bolts, who rules from distant Olympus, enforcing order through strength. The dichotomy here isn't accidental. These archetypes encode deep-seated beliefs about gender, but also about humanity's relationship with the natural world. Earth as womb, sky as authority. Yet these roles are far from monolithic. Look beyond Greece, and the patterns splinter in fascinating ways. The Egyptian goddess Nut isn't an earth mother at all, she's the sky. Her star-studded body arched protectively over the earth god Geb. Their embrace is so tight, the sun god Ra must force them apart to create space for life. Here, the nurturing role flips, challenging assumptions about where care originates. Meanwhile, in Polynesian lore, the Earth Mother Papahanaumoku doesn't just feed her children, she gifts them the islands themselves, shaping land with volcanic fire. This isn't passive fertility, it's creation through transformative force. What's revealing is how these myths both reinforce and complicate gender stereotypes. Sky fathers often wield overt power. Think of Indra's thunderbolts in Hinduism or the Yoruba storm god Shango's fiery axes. But earth mothers hold a different kind of authority. The Mesopotamian Tiamat, often reduced to a monster, begins as the primordial matrix of life, a reminder that destruction and creation are two sides of the same force. These stories expose a tension. Cultures revered feminine creative power even as they relegated women to subordinate roles in society. It's as if the myths preserved a truth that daily life couldn't fully embody, that nurturing requires as much strength as ruling. Modern debates about gender equality echo this ancient dissonance. When we argue over natural roles or the balance of power, we're retreading ground these myths mapped millennia ago. But here's the twist: the myths themselves offer alternatives. The Hindu goddess Kali, dancing on Shiva's chest, embodies both life-giver and destroyer. The Inca Pachamama isn't just a fertility figure, she demands reciprocity, punishing those who take without giving back. These aren't simplistic maternal tropes, they're complex portraits of power that refuse to fit neatly into boxes. Which brings us to the animal symbols woven into these myths: serpents coiled around earth goddesses, eagles perched on sky gods' shoulders. These creatures aren't mere decorations. The serpent, shedding its skin, mirrors the earth cycles of death and rebirth. The eagle, soaring beyond human reach, becomes a living metaphor for transcendent authority. Even gender lines blur here. The Norse Freya, a goddess of love and war, rides a chariot pulled by cats, animals revered for their independence, not docility. These animal companions whisper a subversive truth: the forces that shape existence can't be domesticated. Perhaps that's the real lesson buried in these archetypes. However rigid societies may have framed gender roles, the myths themselves kept cracking the mold, showing earth and sky not as opposites, but as partners in an endless dance of creation. And when we listen closely, we hear an invitation to imagine a world where power and nurture aren't divided, but intertwined like roots in rich, dark soil. Animals in myths aren't just characters, they're emotional shorthand, a way for cultures to crystallize their deepest fears and aspirations into something tangible. Take the Egyptian Bennu bird, a radiant heron said to burst into flames and rise renewed from its own ashes. This isn't just a pretty metaphor for the sunrise. It's a visceral symbol of resilience, a feathered promise that destruction isn't the end. It's the prelude to rebirth. Then there's the Chinese dragon, sinuous and serpentine, weaving through clouds and rivers alike. Unlike the fire-breathing monsters of Western lore, this creature embodies harmony, its coiled strength representing both imperial power and the life-giving rains that nourish crops. Two animals, two entirely different emotional landscapes. One speaks to the terror of annihilation and the hope of renewal. The other channels the delicate balance between authority and benevolence. Why do humans so instinctively project their emotions onto animals? Perhaps because animals live at the edges of our understanding, close enough to recognize their feelings, yet alien enough to carry our projections. A wolf isn't just a predator, it becomes the embodiment of untamed wildness. A spider isn't merely a weaver of silk, it's Anansi the trickster, spinning wisdom from chaos. Myths transform creatures into vessels for what we can't easily articulate: the Bennu's cyclical rebirth, mirroring our own longing to transcend mortality. The dragon's dual nature, reflecting society's tension between control and chaos. This symbolic language didn't vanish with ancient temples. Modern brands harness the same primal associations. Think of the Twitter bird, a descendant of the Bennu, promising connection and reinvention with every tweet. Or the Starbucks siren, a maritime echo of seduction and abundance, luring us with the promise of warmth in a cup. Even sports teams lean into this archetypal power. The Detroit Lions roaring with resilience, the Chicago Bulls charging with unstoppable force. These aren't random mascots, they're mythic echoes, tapping into the same emotional currents that once made dragons and phoenixes sacred. Now shift your gaze upward past the animal kingdom, beyond the earth, to the celestial bodies that anchor so many creation myths. The sun isn't just a star in these stories, it's Ra's golden bark sailing across the sky, or the Japanese Amaterasu whose radiance blesses the world. The moon isn't a rocky satellite, it's the Mesopotamian Sin, measuring time with his crescent, or the Mayan Ixchel, weaving fate in its silver light. Cosmic elements in myths do more than explain natural phenomena. They map the human psyche onto the universe. When the Norse speak of the sun and moon chased by wolves, they're not describing astronomy, they're encoding the fear that even the most constant forces might one day be devoured. This is the alchemy of myth, turning animals into emotions, celestial bodies into deities, the vast unknown into a story we can hold. And in that act of transformation, we find something startling, not just explanations for the world, but reflections of our own fragile, furious, luminous hearts. Before the world took shape, before gods or time or even light, there was the egg. Not a chicken's egg, not anything so small, but the Orphic egg of Greek myth, a cosmic shell holding the seeds of everything. Crack it open and out spills Phanes, the shimmering deity of creation, light bursting from darkness like a newborn's first breath. Half a world away, the Hindu Rigveda describes a golden embryo floating in primordial waters, heat building until it splits the universe wide open. And in China, the cosmic egg's yolk becomes the earth, its white the heavens, a delicate balance of opposites cradled in one fragile shell. These aren't just whimsical images. They're profound emotional anchors, ways for cultures to grasp the ungraspable, to cradle the moment before everything began in something as simple, as universal as an egg. Now dive deeper into the waters that so often cradle these eggs. The Egyptian god Nun isn't just a sea, he's the liquid chaos before land, before names, before the very concept of before. The Babylonian Tiamat is saltwater and storm, a roiling womb that births both monsters and gods. Even the biblical Genesis starts with spirit hovering over dark waters. Why this obsession with watery beginnings? Because water is the ultimate symbol of potential, formless yet fertile, terrifying yet life-giving. Psychologists recognize this duality in our earliest memories. The amniotic fluid of the womb, the primal fear of drowning, the life-sustaining drink that quenches all thirst. Myths tap into that visceral connection, framing creation not as a dry architectural project, but as something emergent, organic, wet with possibility. Here's where science and myth collide in the most unexpected way. The Big Bang Theory, our modern creation story, describes a singularity, a point of infinite density before space and time existed. Swap singularity for egg, and the parallels shimmer. Both imagine existence compressed into something unimaginably small before exploding outward. Both wrestle with the same existential itch. What came before the before? The emotional resonance is identical too. Whether it's Phanes bursting from his shell or the cosmic inflation of the early universe, these stories soothe the same human anxiety, that existence might be random, meaningless. By giving the void a shape, an egg, a singularity, we make the incomprehensible feel almost intimate. But creation myths don't stop at potential, they grapple with the tension that follows. Darkness and light aren't just stages in these stories, they're emotional landscapes. The Maori described Tipo, the endless night before creation, as thick with longing, a darkness that yearned for light. The Norse Ginnungagap isn't just empty, it's charged with the friction between fire and ice, a cosmic anticipation. These aren't neutral descriptions. They're steeped in human feeling, framing the birth of the world as something felt as much as seen. Modern cosmology does the same when it personifies the early universe as excited or cooling, as if the cosmos itself had moods. What does this tell us? That whether through myth or microscope, humanity's quest for origins is never just about facts. It's about finding the emotional weight in the void, the story in the stardust. The Orphic egg and the Big Bang aren't rivals, they're siblings, born from the same human need to hold the infinite in our hands and whisper, "Ah, I see." And perhaps that's the most beautiful paradox of all. The answers change, but the question remains, how do we live with the mystery of our own becoming? The myths suggest we start by cracking it open. Light and darkness, it's the oldest duality, etched into the human psyche long before myths gave it names. In Zoroastrian tradition, the world is a battlefield where Ahura Mazda, the radiant lord of light, wages eternal war against Angra Mainyu, the destructive spirit of darkness. But this isn't just a cosmic struggle, it's a mirror reflecting our deepest instincts. Think about it. Why does every culture, from the Japanese Amaterasu hiding in her cave to the Egyptian Ra sailing his solar bark through the underworld, frame light as victory and darkness as threat? Because our biology demands it. Human eyes are terrible at seeing in the dark. Our ancestors knew twilight as the time when predators prowled, when fires guttered out, when the unknown pressed closest. Myths didn't invent this fear, they gave it a face. Yet light isn't just safety, it's revelation. The Gnostic Gospels describe enlightenment as sparks of divine light trapped in mortal clay. Hindu scriptures equate knowledge with the dawn, dispelling ignorance like mist burned away by the sun. Even the word illuminate comes from the Latin luminare, meaning to light up. This isn't poetic coincidence. Science shows how light regulates our circadian rhythms, dictating when we wake, when we dream, even when we feel most hopeful. The blue glow of morning triggers serotonin, the brain's happiness chemical, while prolonged darkness can spiral into seasonal depression. Myths anticipated this millennia ago. When the Norse gods kindled the stars from sparks of Muspelheim, or when the Cherokee grandmother spider steals fire for humanity, they're not just explaining nature, they're mapping the profound link between light and mental clarity. But here's the twist: darkness in myths is rarely just evil. It's the fertile void where creation stirs. The Babylonian Tiamat is chaos, yes, but also the mother of all. The Hindu goddess Kali dances in the blackness, her necklace of skulls and lolling tongue embodying destruction's necessity. Even Angra Mainyu, for all his malice, plays a role Zoroastrians call drudge, the lie that makes truth visible by contrast. These stories acknowledge what modern psychology confirms. Fear of the dark isn't just about danger. It's about the terror of losing control, of facing the parts of ourselves we'd rather leave unlit. Which brings us to the most haunting question myths tackle. Why does suffering exist? The Persian Bundahishan claims Angra Mainyu invents sickness, old age, and death to corrupt Ahura Mazda's perfect world. The Greek Pandora unleashes misery from her jar, leaving only hope clinging to the rim. But notice the pattern: evil isn't random in these myths, it's purposeful, a shadow that gives light its shape. Modern Theodicy grapples with the same puzzle. How can a benevolent universe allow pain? Myths answer with something deeper than logic. They suggest darkness isn't the opposite of light, it's the canvas. Without Angra Mainyu's venom, Ahura Mazda's healing loses meaning. Without night, the stars have nowhere to shine. So what do we do with this ancient wisdom today? Maybe we stop seeing darkness as something to vanquish and start recognizing it as the space where transformation begins. After all, the most profound growth often happens in the unseen. Seeds splitting underground, neurons firing in sleep, the slow turn of grief into resilience. Myths knew this. That's why they gifted us stories where light doesn't just defeat darkness, it dances with it, forever entwined in the oldest story of all, being human. Evil needs a face, something to point to blame, to cast out. That's why cultures sculpt figures like Satan, the fallen angel who chooses rebellion over obedience, or Amatsu Mikaboshi, the Japanese god of chaos who lurks in the celestial shadows. These aren't just villains, they're psychological tools, ways to externalize the darkness that flickers in every human heart. Think about it. It's far easier to imagine evil as a serpent whispering in Eden than to confront the uncomfortable truth that betrayal, cruelty, and greed emerge from within us, not just from some external force. Myths give these impulses a name, a shape, a story. The Zoroastrian Angra Mainyu isn't just a destroyer, he's the embodiment of envy, laziness, and spite, qualities we recognize in ourselves but hesitate to claim. This scapegoating impulse isn't ancient history. Look at modern politics, where complex problems are reduced to battles against enemies, immigrants, elites, the other. Or consider how social media algorithms thrive on outrage, feeding us neatly packaged villains to despise. The emotional relief is undeniable. When Amatsu Mikaboshi twists the hearts of gods in Shinto myth, or when Satan prowls like a roaring lion in Christian scripture, they offer a cathartic simplicity. If evil has a face, then goodness is just a matter of slaying the right monster. But myths also whisper a subtler truth. The Japanese Shinto tradition sees even destructive spirits as part of a balance, worthy of appeasement rather than eradication. The Christian Satan was once Lucifer, the light bearer, a reminder that corruption often begins with something beautiful. Here's where creation myths reveal their deepest function. They're not just stories about how the world began, but social contracts about how to live in it. The Babylonian Enuma Elish doesn't just crown Marduk king of the gods. It establishes order over chaos, a blueprint for civilization itself. The Hindu Purusha Sukta describes the cosmic giant whose dismembered body becomes the caste system, embedding social hierarchy in sacred narrative. These myths don't merely explain evil, they codify its management, offering rituals, laws, and roles to contain it. Yet the most radical myths challenge this very impulse. The Gnostic demiurge, a flawed creator who traps divine sparks in material prisons, flips the script. What if the system itself is the problem? The West African trickster Eshu delights in blurring moral lines, forcing people to confront ambiguity. These stories resist easy answers, insisting that evil isn't always out there. Sometimes it's woven into the fabric of reality, or worse, into our own choices. So what do we lose when we reduce evil to a scapegoat? The chance to see ourselves clearly. Myths that externalize darkness offer comfort but risk absolving us of responsibility. Meanwhile, those that sit with complexity, like the Aztec belief that the gods needed human blood not because they were cruel, but because creation demanded sacrifice, ask harder questions. They force us to wrestle with the unsettling idea that light and shadow aren't just forces in the world, but within us, tangled together like roots in the same soil. And perhaps that's the real creation story, not how the world was made, but how we learn to bear its weight and our own. Stories don't just explain the world, they bind people together. Take the Mande creation myth, where the blacksmith god Pharaoh molds humanity from clay, then teaches them to farm, build, and live in harmony. This isn't just a tale, it's social glue, reinforcing values like cooperation and shared labor as sacred acts. Notice how Pharaoh doesn't favor one tribe or class, his gifts are for everyone, a narrative blueprint for collective survival. Myths like this don't merely describe community, they create it, transforming strangers into kin with a shared ancestry and purpose. But not all myths weave the same inclusive magic. Compare Pharaoh's egalitarian vision to the Aztec story of the 5 sons, where the gods demand human sacrifice to keep the world alive. Here, social cohesion comes at a brutal cost, unity forged through ritualized violence, reinforcing hierarchies where priests and warriors stand above the rest. Or consider the biblical tale of the Tower of Babel, where divine intervention scatters humanity into competing factions, speaking different tongues. These stories aren't neutral. They're tools sharpened to justify power structures or exclude the other. Fast forward to modern times and the pattern holds. Nationalist movements cherry-pick myths to craft exclusionary identities, Viking sagas weaponized by white supremacists, or the Roman Aeneid twisted into propaganda about imperial destiny. Yet there's a counter-current. Multicultural societies reclaim myths as bridges, not borders. The Hawaiian concept of aloha, aina, love for the land once bound indigenous communities, now inspires global environmental solidarity. The Yoruba trickster Eshu, once a local folktale, becomes a symbol of diaspora resilience in Afro-Caribbean traditions. Myths flex to fit the needs of those who tell them, stretching like living skin over the bones of history. What's fascinating is how these shared stories seep into personal identity. A child hearing the Mande myth internalizes cooperation as divine. Another, raised on Babel, learns to mistrust difference. But here's the twist: we're not passive recipients. Just as cultures remix myths, individuals tailor them to their inner landscapes. The same person might see Pharaoh as a call to activism one day and a metaphor for personal growth the next. That's the alchemy of myth. It's collective enough to unite millions, yet intimate enough to whisper uniquely to every heart. So next time you hear an ancient story, ask not just what it says about the past, but what it's building or breaking in the present. Because the most powerful creation myths aren't about how the world began. They're about how we choose to continue it together. Every culture has its creation myths, but so does every person. Think about the stories we tell ourselves. The self-made entrepreneur who clawed their way up from nothing. The artist who transformed pain into beauty. The immigrant who built a new life from scratch. These aren't just personal triumphs, they're modern-day cosmologies, reshaping the raw materials of experience into narratives as potent as any ancient tale of gods and chaos. When someone says they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, they're channeling the same energy as the Babylonian Marduk, carving order from Tiamat's body, claiming agency in a world that often feels random. Consider the emotional architecture of these stories. The rags to riches arc mirrors the Polynesian Maui fishing up islands from the sea. Both are about transforming lack into abundance through sheer will. The survivor narrative, where trauma becomes strength, echoes the Japanese myth of the shattered Izanagi fleeing the underworld, forever changed but unbroken. Even the quintessential American dream, with its promise of reinvention, taps into the same longing as the Hindu concept of cyclical rebirth, the belief that we're not bound by our origins. These parallels aren't coincidental. They reveal how deeply we need to frame our lives as journeys of meaning, not just sequences of events. Yet there's danger in these simplifications. Myths, whether personal or cultural, often gloss over the messy middle, the luck, the help, the systemic advantages or disadvantages that shape outcomes. When a CEO credits their success solely to grit, it's like the Norse gods claiming credit for the world while ignoring Ymir's corpse beneath their feet. Oversimplified narratives can erase collective effort, justify inequality, or worse, turn suffering into a required rite of passage. The Aztecs believed the gods needed blood to sustain the sun. Modern hustle culture sometimes echoes that logic, treating exhaustion as a badge of honor. This myth-making spills into pop culture with startling clarity. Superhero origin stories are pure creation myths. Peter Parker's radioactive bite as divine encounter, Black Panther's vibranium as a God-gifted resource. Even reality TV peddles archetypes: the underdog, the villain, the phoenix rising from disgrace. These aren't just tropes, they're emotional blueprints, offering templates for how to process failure, power, and identity. When Tony Stark builds his suit in a cave or Mona restores the heart of Te-Fiti, audiences aren't just entertained, they're shown a way to reframe their own struggles as heroes' journeys. The lesson here isn't that personal myths are lies, it's that they're choices. We can craft narratives that trap us like Icarus flying too close to the sun, or ones that set us free, like the Cherokee grandmother spider who never stops weaving new solutions. The oldest creation myths taught that chaos could birth galaxies. Maybe our own stories, told with honesty and grace, can do something just as miraculous. Star Wars opens with a crawl about a fallen republic and a rebellion rising from its ashes. Sound familiar? It's the Enuma Elish rebooted with lightsabers. George Lucas didn't just borrow from mythology, he plugged into the same emotional wiring that made ancient creation stories stick. The Force isn't some sci-fi gimmick, it's the Polynesian mana, the Hindu prana, the Zoroastrian light of Ahura Mazda, repackaged for a generation raised on technology. And when Darth Vader's mask cracks to reveal Anakin's face, it's the same catharsis as the Babylonian Tiamat split in two, order wrested from chaos, identity reclaimed from ruin. Marvel's pantheon takes it further. Thor isn't just a Norse god in spandex. His arc mirrors the same fall and redemption beats as the Maori trickster Maui. The snap, that's the flood myth with better CGI, half of life wiped out, then painstakingly rebuilt, echoing the Aztec belief that creation demands sacrifice. Even Wakanda's vibranium echoes the golden embryos of Hindu and Greek myth, a divine material shaping destiny. These franchises thrive because they're not inventing new stories. They're remixing the oldest ones, swapping clay tablets for streaming platforms. But here's the rub: when myths go corporate, do they lose their teeth? Ancient tales weren't afraid of ambiguity. The Cherokee grandmother spider steals fire knowing it'll bring both warmth and burns. Modern blockbusters often sand off the rough edges. Thanos' genocide gets a moral loophole, he's just balancing the universe. And Kylo Ren's heel turn leans on daddy issues rather than true moral wrestling. Compare that to the Norse Loki, whose chaos births both monsters and miracles, or the Hindu Shiva, who destroys worlds with one hand and cradles creation in the other. Depth isn't in the spectacle, it's in the refusal to simplify. Yet maybe these modern myths adapt brilliantly. The Mandalorian's found family trope taps into the same longing as the Mandé people's pharaoh myth, belonging forged through shared struggle. And when Spider-Man's Uncle Ben dies, it's not just a plot device. It's the Cherokee teaching that grief is the price of wisdom. The difference: ancient myths were communal survival guides, while today's are global campfires flickering across screens from Tokyo to Tulsa. The real question isn't whether these stories lack depth, it's whether we're listening deeply enough. When Black Panther's Killmonger demands to know, "Is this your king?" Before burning the sacred garden, he's channeling the same fury as the Babylonian Marduk confronting Tiamat rage at systems that hoard power. The best modern myths don't just entertain, they dare us to ask whose creation stories get told and whose get erased. Because every time we click play, we're not just escaping reality, we're rehearsing it one archetype at a time. Creation myths don't just inspire, they can also imprison. Take the Hindu Purusha Sukta, where the cosmic giant's dismembered body becomes the blueprint for the caste system. His mouth forms the Brahmins, his arms the warriors, his thighs the merchants, his feet the laborers. This isn't just poetry, It's divine justification for hierarchy, embedding inequality into the very fabric of existence. And it's not unique. The Egyptian god King Pharaohs ruled as living embodiments of Horus, their authority unchallengeable because it flowed from the heavens. Even the medieval European doctrine of the divine right of kings' claimed power was ordained by God, making rebellion not just treason, but sacrilege. These stories aren't neutral. They're tools sharpened over centuries to silence dissent and sanctify the status quo. But the manipulation runs deeper than politics. Consider how myths weaponize destiny, the idea that your birth, your suffering, even your oppression are part of some grand design. The Greek fates weave each life's thread before birth. The Norse Norns carve runes of unchangeable fortune. On the surface, these tales offer comfort, a sense that everything happens for a reason. But twist them slightly and they become cages. If a slave's plight is written by the gods, resistance isn't just futile, it's blasphemy. Modern echoes of this logic linger in phrases like, "everything happens for a reason," or "it's God's plan," which can unintentionally gaslight pain into passive acceptance. Yet myths aren't static. Just as they've been used to oppress, they've also been reclaimed to liberate. The same Yoruba Orisha traditions that colonizers once demonized now fuel movements for black empowerment, with figures like Ogun, god of iron and revolution, recast as symbols of resistance. Feminist scholars revisit the Mesopotamian Tiamat not as a monster to be slain, but as a primordial mother demonized by patriarchal conquerors. Even the Hindu Dalit community reinterprets the Purusha Sukta, arguing that if all castes sprang from one body, then division is a human corruption, not divine will. Reclaiming myths isn't about rewriting history, it's about exposing the choices buried in the stories we've been told. This tension between myth and truth isn't just cultural, it's scientific. For centuries, creation stories were the only explanations for how the world began. Then came Darwin, Hubble, the double helix narratives of evolution, cosmic expansion, and DNA that seemed to shatter ancient cosmologies. But here's the surprise: science didn't kill myth, it reframed it. The Big Bang singularity mirrors the Hindu cosmic egg. Quantum entanglement echoes the Aboriginal Dreamtime's interconnectedness. The difference: science seeks empirical truth, while myth explores emotional truth, not how the universe works, but what it means to live within it. So where does that leave us? With a choice, we can reject harmful myths outright, like discarding the divine right of kings, or we can reinterpret them, as indigenous scientists do when they blend traditional knowledge with astrophysics. But most importantly, we can recognize that every creation story, whether carved on temple walls or published in peer-reviewed journals, is ultimately a mirror. It reflects not just where we came from, but who we believe we're allowed to become. Science and myth seem like sworn enemies, one obsessed with evidence, the other with metaphor. But dig deeper, and you'll find they're more like estranged siblings, each grappling with the same existential questions in different languages. Consider the Big Bang, our modern creation epic, a singularity exploding into galaxies, not so different from the cracking of the Orphic egg or the bursting of the Hindu golden embryo. Both science and myth start with the same awe, the sheer improbability of existence, but where science charts the how, myth wrestles with the why. Neil deGrasse Tyson once quipped that the Big Bang is just Genesis for physicists, and he's right. The equations may be new, but the wonder is ancient. Yet myths do something science can't or won't. They personify chaos, turning abstract forces into gods and monsters we can bargain with, blame, or beg for mercy. When a tsunami strikes, science explains tectonic shifts. Myth offers Poseidon's wrath. Both are attempts to tame terror, but one soothes the gut while the other feeds the mind. This isn't ignorance, it's emotional pragmatism. Studies show that under stress, even staunch atheists instinctively anthropomorphize nature, assigning intent to hurricanes or diseases. Our brains are wired to seek agents behind chaos, a trait myths have exploited for millennia. Science gives us control, but myth gives us catharsis. The real friction comes when we confuse their domains. Fundamentalists who treat Genesis as a biology textbook miss the point, just as atheists who dismiss myth as primitive science overlook its genius. Myths aren't failed facts, they're emotional blueprints. The Navajo story of the hero twins slaying monsters to create the world isn't a rival to paleontology. It's a metaphor for resilience, teaching that courage can carve order from chaos. Similarly, evolution doesn't negate the Maori tale of Tain separating earth and sky. It just answers a different question. One tells us where we came from, the other tells us who we're meant to be. Nowhere is this duality more vivid than in childhood. Kids don't just learn myths, they live them. A toddler's tantrum over a broken cookie mirrors Thor's fury over a stolen hammer. Their bedtime fear of shadows echoes ancient dread of the underworld. Psychologists find that children process trauma through storytelling long before they grasp logic. A kid who imagines monsters under the bed isn't being irrational. They're doing what every culture has done, giving form to formless fears. Modern parents might replace demons with germs, but the function is identical: to make the invisible manageable. So perhaps the debate isn't science versus myth, but science and myth, two ways of knowing, one mapping the world outside us, the other charting the wilderness within. The night sky is just hydrogen and helium until someone points out Orion's belt, and suddenly it's a story. That's the alchemy myths offer, not an alternative to truth, but a way to bear it. After all, what's evolution but the ultimate underdog story? Life clawing its way from sludge to stardust against all odds. The facts are science's domain. The meaning, that's where myth picks up the thread. A child's first question is often, why? Why does the sun rise? Why do birds sing? Why are we here? And for thousands of years, creation myths have been the answer, distilled into bedtime stories and picture books. Think of Noah's Ark rendered in bright colors, or the Greek Titans simplified as squabbling giants. These aren't just tales, they're emotional scaffolding, helping young minds grapple with life's biggest mysteries through metaphor and wonder. When a 4-year-old hears that the moon is a goddess chasing the sun across the sky, they're not learning astronomy, they're learning that the universe has rhythm, that even the night sky tells a story. But myths do more than explain, they model emotional resilience. The Cherokee story of Grandmother Spider stealing fire doesn't just teach where light came from, it shows cunning triumphing over adversity. The Inuit tale of Sedna, betrayed by her father yet becoming ruler of the sea, mirrors a child's own fears of abandonment and powerlessness, reframing them as sources of strength. Psychologists call this narrative identity theory, the idea that we construct our sense of self through stories. For children, these myths become early blueprints, offering templates for courage, justice, and belonging long before they encounter these concepts in the abstract. Yet there's a danger in simplification. Strip away a myth's cultural context, and it becomes a blunt instrument. Take the Christian Genesis story often taught to kids: a talking snake, a forbidden fruit, a punitive expulsion. Without nuance, it can seed shame or binary thinking: good versus evil, obedience versus rebellion. Contrast this with how Maori children learn of Rangi and Papa. Their separation isn't a fall from grace, but a necessary act of love, creating space for life to flourish. The difference isn't just theological, it's emotional. One frames existence as a test, the other as a gift. This is where global comparisons become vital. A child raised on West African Anansi tales learns that trickery can be cleverness in disguise. One immersed in Hindu stories of Krishna's childhood, mischief sees divinity in playfulness. Norse myths teach that even gods bleed, while Aboriginal Dreamtime stories weave the land itself into identity. Each tradition offers a unique emotional vocabulary, a different lens for interpreting struggle, joy, and connection. The goal isn't to indoctrinate, but to equip children with a kaleidoscope of narratives tools for navigating a complex world. Modern educators are catching on. Montessori schools use Native American creation stories to teach ecology, showing how rivers and mountains are kin, not resources. Japanese kindergartens recount the tale of Amaterasu emerging from her cave, linking sunlight to community and shared joy. These approaches honor myth's original purpose, not to dictate truth but to spark curiosity. When a child asks if the moon really is a goddess, the best answer might be another question: what do you think? That's the magic of these stories. They don't just provide answers, they teach kids how to wonder, how to sit with mystery, how to build bridges between the known and the unknown. And perhaps that's the greatest gift creation myths offer children: permission to imagine their own place in the story. Whether it's a Navajo child tracing their lineage to changing woman or a Swedish kid marveling at Yggdrasil's branches, these tales whisper the same promise: you belong to something vast, strange, and beautiful. Not as a passive listener, but as the next voice in a conversation that began when the first storyteller looked at the stars and said, "Let me tell you how this all began." East and West spin time differently, not just on clocks, but in their very bones. Hindu cosmology imagines the universe breathing in and out, collapsing and rebirthing over trillion-year cycles called kalpas. There's no final judgment here, no end credits, just an endless dance of creation and dissolution, like waves washing over the same shore. Contrast that with the Judeo-Christian Genesis, where time arrows forward. One creation, one fall, one redemption arc culminating in an apocalyptic finale. These aren't just storytelling quirks, they're emotional fingerprints. When your myth says existence is a revolving door, you're freed from the weight of permanence. But when it's a one-act play, every choice feels monumental: salvation or damnation hanging in the balance. This dichotomy shapes more than theology, it molds cultural reflexes. The Hindu-Buddhist wheel of samsara teaches detachment. If life is cyclical, suffering is transient, and even death is just a comma. Modern mindfulness apps peddling non-attachment are riffing on this ancient rhythm. Meanwhile, the West's linear myths fuel our obsession with legacy. From pyramids to Pulitzer Prizes, we're haunted by the need to leave indelible marks, terrified of being forgotten in a universe that only moves forward. Climate change exposes this rift starkly. Societies rooted in cyclical thinking often prioritize sustainability. See Bhutan's gross national happiness index, while linear cultures chase exponential growth, treating Earth like a disposable rocket hurtling toward some capitalist rapture. Art distills these contrasts into visceral experiences. Take Hindu temple sculptures where gods dance within mandalas, eternal circles mirroring cosmic cycles. Compare that to Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel, where Adam's outstretched finger hurtles toward a singular moment of divine spark. Even modern cinema mirrors this split. Bollywood's reincarnation romances versus Hollywood's three-act heroes' journeys. But the most telling collision is in how we grieve. The Japanese Obon Festival welcomes ancestral spirits back annually, a cyclical homecoming. Western funerals, with their "rest in peace" epitaphs, treat death as a full stop. Perhaps the most radical myths refuse the binary. The Aboriginal Dreamtime collapses past and present. The Norse Ragnarok is both finale and fresh start. These stories whisper a third way. That time might not be a line or a circle, but a mosaic, every shard holding its own eternity. Music begins where words fail, and nowhere is this more true than in Haydn's The Creation, where soaring violins and thundering choruses paint the birth of the cosmos itself. Listen closely, and you'll hear the Genesis story transformed into pure emotion, the dizzying chaos of the opening bars dissolving into luminous order as light bursts forth. This isn't just composition, it's alchemy, turning ancient myth into a visceral experience. Haydn didn't set out to retell the story. He aimed to make you feel it, the awe of the first dawn, the trembling wonder of life stirring in the void. And he's not alone. From Vivaldi's Four Seasons echoing pagan cycles of rebirth to John Adams' Harmonieleur channeling the explosive energy of the Big Bang, composers have always reached for creation myths when they need to touch something deeper than reason. Visual artists chase the same transcendence. Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel ceiling isn't just a Bible illustration, it's a portal. The way Adam's limp finger hangs millimeters from God's, charged with divine electricity, captures the unbearable tension between human frailty and cosmic potential. Centuries later, Frida Kahlo would subvert the same imagery in the love embrace of the universe, where she cradles Diego Rivera like a wounded Adam, surrounded by Aztec earth goddesses and Christian angels. Both artists, separated by time and tradition, use creation motifs to ask the same question. What does it mean to be both fragile and infinite? But why do these stories endure as creative fuel? Because they're emotional shorthand. A Renaissance painter depicting God separating light from darkness isn't just illustrating scripture, they're tapping into universal awe at the sheer improbability of existence. When modern sculptor Anish Kapoor builds Swayambh, a massive red wax block slowly moving through doorways, he's channeling the Hindu concept of the self-born universe, making the abstract tactile. Creation myths give artists a shared vocabulary for emotions too vast for everyday language. The terror of chaos, the euphoria of beginnings, the grief of lost paradises. Now turn the lens inward. Your personal creation myth might not involve gods or floods, but it's there the story you tell yourself about how you became you. Maybe it's the breakup that forced you to rebuild, the mentor who saw your potential before you did, or the quiet moment you decided to change everything. These narratives aren't just memories, they're emotional blueprints shaping how you face new challenges. The Japanese art of kintsugi, mending broken pottery with gold, echoes this perfectly. It's not about hiding cracks, but celebrating them as part of the object's creation story. So here's the invitation. Next time you hear a symphony swell or stand before a painting that steals your breath, ask what creation myth it's whispering. Then listen for the echoes in your own life, because whether carved in marble or scrawled in a journal, these stories all lead to the same truth. Every ending is someone else's beginning, and every fracture holds the light of what comes next. Think back to the moments that shaped you, not just the milestones, but the fractures and turning points that rearranged your world. Your life isn't a random sequence, it's a myth in the making, a story where you're both hero and bard. Try this, map your journey like a creation myth. Start with your personal void. Was it a childhood home full of whispers, the ache of loneliness in a crowded school hallway? Or maybe the electric thrill of realizing you were meant for something different. Then trace the forces that carved order from that chaos. Was there a mentor who saw your potential like Marduk spotting land in Tiamat's flesh? A betrayal that became your serpent in the garden, teaching you resilience through loss? Now dig deeper. Notice the emotional echoes, the way you keep recreating the same patterns, like a Norse saga repeating across generations. Do you chase validation like the Maori siblings desperate for light? or retreat into yourself like Amaterasu hiding in her cave. These aren't flaws, they're clues to your mythic blueprint. The Cherokee say rivers remember their paths even when they dry up. Your struggles, they're the riverbeds of your becoming. Here's where the magic happens. Myths aren't set in stone. Just as the Greeks rewrote their pantheon to reflect new values, you can reframe your narrative. That job loss that felt like Ragnarok, maybe it was the flood that cleared space for reinvention. The family rift that shattered your world, perhaps it's your sky father and earth mother moment, painful separation creating room to breathe. Psychologists call this narrative therapy, but poets knew it first. We heal by telling our stories backward, sideways, in versions where the monster becomes the mentor and the wound becomes the womb. And when crisis strikes, loss, failure, the ground giving way, that's when these personal myths become lifelines. The Inuit didn't just fear Sedna's storms, they sang to her, turning terror into dialogue. Your darkest chapters, they're your Sedna moments, the stories you forge in those depths, whether you cast yourself as victim, survivor, or unlikely architect of grace, will shape what rises from the wreckage. So whose voice echoes in your head when the world goes quiet? Is it the critic, the protector, the child who still believes in magic? Listen closely. That's your chorus of gods and monsters waiting for you to pick up the pen and rewrite the ending. When COVID-19 swept across continents, it didn't just spread a virus, it birthed myths in real time. Patient Zero became our modern Tiamat, a faceless origin point for chaos, hunted down like a mythological beast. Conspiracy theories bloomed like pandanus trees after rain, each claiming to reveal the true story behind the pandemic, lab leaks, 5G towers, divine punishment. Sound familiar? These are just the latest threads in humanity's oldest coping mechanism. The ancient Greeks blamed Apollo's arrows for plagues. Medieval Europeans scapegoated Jewish communities as well poisoners. The names change, but the pattern holds. When fear grips society, we don't just seek answers, we demand villains, heroes, and moral arcs to make suffering bearable. Now turn to climate change, where new myths are forming like storm clouds. The tipping point has become our Ragnarok, an apocalyptic deadline looming just beyond the horizon. Greta Thunberg's school strike echoes the Norse myth of the children who will survive the world's end, inheriting what's left. Even the language we use, saving the planet, frames Earth as an Eden we've betrayed, a narrative straight from Genesis. But here's the twist. Where ancient flood myths often ended with divine mercy, Noah's rainbow, Utnapishtim's immortality, our modern climate stories lack that catharsis. There's no cosmic parent promising to never flood us again, just data charts creeping upward. Yet this crisis storytelling serves a vital function. Psychologists studying disaster response find that communities with shared narratives recover faster. After Hurricane Katrina, New Orleans didn't just rebuild, it wove the storm into its identity, jazz funerals honoring the dead while affirming survival. Japan's tsunami survivors speak of kizuna, the bonds forged through shared trauma, echoing the Aboriginal concept of dreamtime, where land and people are interwoven through story. These aren't just coping mechanisms, they're cultural immune systems, helping societies metabolize grief too vast for any one person to bear. What's different today is speed and scale. Ancient plague myths took generations to crystallize. Ours trend on Twitter within hours. The Black Death birthed the dance macabre art genre over decades. COVID spawned lockdown art in weeks. This acceleration risks turning myths into memes, flattening complexity into viral snippets, but it also offers something unprecedented: global myth-making. When Italian balconies erupted in song during quarantine, or when wildfires inspired international climate murals, we witnessed something rare: stories forming across borders in real time, as if the internet had become a digital campfire. So what does the future hold? Perhaps myths that blend AI and animism, where algorithms are the new oracles, or bewildered stories that borrow from indigenous cosmologies, treating rivers as ancestors and carbon as a modern demon to be exorcised. One thing's certain, as long as humans face the unknown, we'll keep spinning stories to light the dark. The next great myths won't be etched on clay tablets, they'll be coded in tweets, TikToks, and the quiet tales we tell ourselves at 3 a.m., stitching meaning from the chaos of our age. We're standing at the edge of a new kind of creation, not from clay or chaos, but from code. Artificial intelligence isn't just reshaping industries, it's birthing a fresh mythology. Think about it. When OpenAI's ChatGPT composes poetry or Midjourney conjures landscapes from thin air, we're witnessing something eerily familiar. The summoning of form from void, like digital Marduks sculpting worlds with keystrokes instead of swords. These aren't mere tools, they're becoming modern creator deities in our collective imagination. Already, whispers of AI alignment echo ancient fears of gods gone rogue, Prometheus fire turned into algorithmic bias, Pandora's box reborn as unchecked machine learning. The emotional undercurrent, a primal tension between awe and dread, the same mix that once surrounded Smith gods forging weapons too powerful for mortals to wield safely. Then there's the metaverse, where virtual afterlives bloom like digital lotus flowers. Platforms like Decentraland and VR Chat aren't just playgrounds, they're becoming the new Elysian fields, offering immortality through avatars that outlive flesh and blood selves. In South Korea, grief tech companies create AI replicas of the deceased, allowing conversations with loved ones long after their physical voices fade. It's Orpheus with a hard drive, the same yearning to cheat death, now armed with neural networks instead of liars. These technologies tap into something ancient, the human refusal to accept finality, the desperate hope that connection can outlast decay. But where the Egyptians preserved bodies for the soul's return, we upload consciousness to clouds, trading canopic jars for cloud servers. Yet for all their novelty, these digital myths grapple with age-old hungers. The loneliness driving someone to seek solace in an AI companion mirrors the Sumerians carving votive statues to stand in prayer when they couldn't, the quest for perfect virtual selves. That's Narcissus gazing into the smartphone pool. Even blockchain's promise of decentralized utopias rehashes the same dream the Babel builders chased, a world where hierarchies crumble and everyone speaks the same cryptographic tongue. The mediums change, but the emotional blueprints stay hauntingly familiar. This raises the thorniest question: can the old myths stretch to cover these new realities, or must we forge entirely new stories? Some traditions adapt brilliantly. The Hindu concept of Maya, the illusion of material reality, slots neatly into debates about simulation theory. Buddhist teachings on non-attachment offer balm for digital overload. But other myths strain at the seams. How does the Christian resurrection narrative compete with mind uploading? Can indigenous cosmologies centered on land stewardship translate to virtual ecosystems? Perhaps the answer lies in hybrid vigor. Like the Japanese syncretism of Shinto and Buddhism, we might blend silicon and soil, coding our ancestral stories into algorithms without erasing their roots. As we hurtle toward these uncharted territories, one truth emerges: myths aren't relics, they're living systems, mutating to metabolize new fears and desires. The same impulse that painted bison on cave walls now renders NFTs. The hunger that built cathedrals constructs digital shrines. Whether through sacred texts or neural networks, we're still chasing the oldest magic: the power to name the chaos, to whisper meaning into the void. And perhaps that's the most enduring creation myth of all, the human mind, forever spinning stories to bridge the abyss between what is and what could be. Creation myths are far more than relics of ancient imagination. They're living mirrors, reflecting humanity's deepest fears, fiercest hopes, and most enduring values across time. Whether it's the Babylonian struggle against primordial chaos or the Aboriginal songlines weaving land and spirit together, these stories distill raw human emotion into cosmic drama. They reveal what keeps us awake at night, the terror of disorder, the ache for belonging, and what stirs us at dawn, the stubborn belief that our existence matters. From the Inuit Sedna's wrathful waves to the Christian Eden's shattered innocence, every culture's origin story is a fingerprint of its collective psyche, pressed into the clay of narrative. Consider how these myths still pulse beneath modern life. The startup founder working tirelessly to build something from nothing channels Marduk carving order from Tiamat's flesh. Climate activists warning of ecological collapse echo flood myths where survival hinges on humility and change. Even personal milestones, births, breakups, breakthroughs, follow mythic arcs of destruction and rebirth. The stories haven't faded, they've shape-shifted, trading temple walls for TED Talks and sacred texts for cinematic universes. So here's an invitation. Look inward at the creation myths that resonate with you. Does the resilience of the Cherokee grandmother spider speak to your struggles? Does the Hindu cosmic dance of endless renewal comfort your fears of impermanence? The stories we gravitate toward aren't accidents, they're clues to our private emotional landscapes, the hidden blueprints of how we navigate chaos and craft meaning. As the screen fades and these ancient voices linger, remember, you're not just a spectator of myths, you're a participant in an unbroken chain of storytelling that began when the first human gazed at the stars and wondered, how? The comment section below awaits your favorite creation tales, but more importantly, so does the unwritten future, because every generation adds its verse to humanity's epic, and perhaps the next great myth, the one that helps our descendants make sense of their world, is already taking shape in the choices you make today. The fire is still burning, the story is still yours